Pick up that tissue and scrub the sink. If you want to sit here, you'd better earn it. The words cut through the hushed cabin of NorthStar Airlines Flight 782. Passengers froze, eyes flicking from their champagne flutes to the confrontation unfolding by the first-class lavatory. Harper Lang, the senior flight attendant, stood rigid with authority, arms crossed, her voice dripping disdain. Before her, Selena Ward remained composed, her dark eyes steady despite the humiliation pressing in from all sides. She had asked politely if the restroom could be cleaned before use. Instead, she was handed a tissue and told to clean it herself. Gasps rippled through the rows. Phones appeared, screens glowing. No one moved to intervene. Harper's smugness radiated as she tapped her polished shoe. Selena's lips curved into the faintest smile, not of surrender, but of recognition. Harper had no idea who she was dealing with, and within hours, Selena Ward would bring an entire airline fleet to the ground. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 6 hours earlier, before humiliation and cell phones recording in the cabin, Selena Ward rolled her modest suitcase through the bright corridors of Kennedy International. Unlike the polished business travelers in tailored suits, she wore a simple navy cardigan over a white blouse, her hair pulled back neatly but without fanfare. She looked like any other young professional heading overseas for work, someone easy to overlook in the constant current of airport life. And that was exactly how she preferred it. To most eyes, Selena was just another passenger. What almost no one in the terminal knew was that she was one of the foremost aerospace lawyers in the country, a senior advisor to the International Council on Aviation Standards. She had spent years shaping safety policies that airlines were required to follow worldwide. The irony was sharp. The woman often responsible for keeping planes in the air was, at this moment, simply trying to board one without drawing attention. Her destination was Geneva, where she would be attending a global conference on airline safety and compliance. It was not her first time representing her field at such a high level, but this year carried special weight. A series of mechanical failures in multiple carriers had forced regulators to consider stricter oversight. Selena's analysis was to be central in those deliberations. Her presentation, she knew, could alter the future of aviation safety on a global scale. Still, she moved quietly through the airport like any other traveler. She stopped briefly at a small coffee shop, ordered a black coffee, and pulled out her phone. A message blinked from Professor Alan Bishop, her longtime colleague, and now the chair of the council. She advised, "Safe travels, Selena. Geneva needs your clarity. Don't let anyone rattle you before you get here." Selena smiled faintly, appreciating his words more than she could express. Bishop had mentored her since law school, recognizing early her ability to balance empathy with steel in matters of policy. She typed a quick reply, "Boarding soon. We'll deliver as promised." She tucked her phone away and continued toward the gate, unnoticed by the parade of passengers in expensive shoes and noise-canceling headphones. She had never cared about being noticed. For Selena, the work itself was the power, not the recognition, but she was not blind. She knew that her skin color, her youth, and her understated presence often caused others to misjudge her. In conference rooms, she had been mistaken for an assistant, a student, sometimes even a bystander. It never angered her. It taught her. Every misjudgment became a lesson in patience, timing, and the art of allowing others to reveal themselves. By the time she reached Gate B17, boarding had not yet begun. A small crowd of passengers in suits and luxury travel wear clustered around the first-class lane. Selena stood to the side, sipping her coffee, scanning the boarding screens. She recognized one name on the crew list, Harper Lang. Selena remembered her. Years ago, during a compliance audit of NorthStar Airlines, Harper had been a name muttered among cabin crew, rigid, quick to discipline, proud of her unshakable authority in the cabin. Back then, Selena had not thought much of it. She filed the information away, as she did with so many details. The boarding announcement came at last. First-class passengers were invited forward, and Selena moved with the crowd, presenting her boarding pass to the gate agent. The agent smiled warmly, scanning the code. "Miss Ward, seat 2A. Have a wonderful flight." Selena inclined her head in thanks and stepped onto the jet bridge. The air grew cooler, tinged with the scent of fuel and fresh upholstery. She entered the cabin quietly, placing her small bag into the overhead bin before sliding into her seat. The first-class section gleamed with polished wood and soft lighting. Passengers settled quickly, some opening laptops, others ordering champagne before takeoff. Selena adjusted her seatbelt, resting her coffee on the tray, and allowed herself a moment of calm. She had hours of review waiting on her tablet. But for now, she simply closed her eyes and exhaled. It was then that she heard the first sharp tone of Harper Lang. "Sir, if you're in this cabin, I expect a shirt with a collar, not a t-shirt." "This isn't coach," the reprimand carried across the cabin. A younger man in his 20s, clearly flustered, fumbled with his jacket as Harper looked on with raised brows. The exchange ended quickly, but it set a note in the air, one of judgment disguised as professionalism. Selena opened her eyes and studied Harper. The woman was tall, with carefully styled blonde hair tucked neatly under her cap. Her uniform was immaculate, every button in place, every fold crisp. But more than the uniform, it was her expression that drew attention, stern, appraising, as though every passenger was already on trial. Selena felt the weight of Harper's gaze sweep briefly over her. The attendant's eyes paused a moment, then moved on, carrying an unspoken message, "I'll be watching you too." The plane pushed back from the gate, engines humming with familiar vibration. Safety demonstrations played, champagne flutes clinked, and the flight lifted into the night sky. Selena opened her tablet, reviewing the slides she would present in Geneva. The irony did not escape her. She was preparing to speak about protecting passengers worldwide, even as she sat under the scrutiny of someone who might soon test her patience in a very different way. 2 hours into the flight, the cabin lights dimmed as dinner service concluded. Passengers settled into movies or reclined for rest. Selena rose quietly, stretching her legs before making her way toward the lavatory. It wasn't unusual for her to do so mid-flight. She disliked sitting too long. But when she reached the small door near the galley, Harper intercepted her with that same sharp authority. "Hold on," Harper said, stepping in front of her. "That lavatory isn't ready." Selena glanced at the closed door. "Not ready?" "It hasn't been tidied," Harper replied briskly. "If you insist on using it, you'll need to wipe it down first. Here." She extended a tissue. As though the matter was settled, the words were quiet, almost procedural, but beneath them was something else: dismissal, assumption, disrespect. Selena's hand did not move to take the tissue. She studied Harper instead, her calm expression betraying none of the sharp thoughts forming in her mind. Around them, a few passengers stirred, curious, and in that moment the stage was set for the confrontation that would ground an entire fleet. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. For Harper Lang, 30 years of flying had taught her one truth: order in the cabin came only from control. Not the soft, smiling kind the training manuals described, but control enforced with precision, authority, and the occasional sharp edge. She had seen too many passengers test boundaries. Men sneaking into first class with fake upgrades, women trying to switch seats mid-flight, children pressing call buttons like toys. Harper believed she had earned her reputation as NorthStar Airlines' most dependable senior flight attendant by keeping those impulses in check. Supervisors praised her discipline. Colleagues often deferred to her experience. Passengers rarely forgot her presence, though not always fondly. Harper didn't mind. Respect was better than affection. That night on Flight 782 to Geneva, Harper had already catalogued the cabin's 32 first-class passengers with the precision of a customs inspector. Row 1, a hedge fund executive with too much cologne. Row 2, A quiet black woman traveling alone, dressed modestly. Row 3, a family of 4, the children already bouncing against their seatbelts. Harper had made notes in her head. Trouble could come from any of them. But her eyes kept returning to the woman in 2A Selena Ward, though Harper had not bothered to read the manifest closely enough to note her name. Didn't match the picture Harper carried of a first-class passenger. No designer luggage, no diamond jewelry, no expensive shoes. Her navy cardigan looked like it belonged in an office cubicle, not in the front of a luxury cabin. Harper prided herself on being able to spot irregularities instantly, and something about this passenger rang false to her. Was it her calmness? The way she didn't glance around nervously as many economy upgraders did? Or was it the fact that she didn't seem impressed by first class at all? Harper decided then that she would test this one. Not out of cruelty, she told herself, but to protect standards. If you let one person slip through, the whole cabin noticed. During the first dinner service, Harper moved briskly between rows, delivering plates of seared salmon and duck confit, with the grace of someone who had repeated the routine thousands of times. But she noticed Selena didn't ask for wine, nor did she linger over dessert. She finished quickly, returned her tray with polite thanks, and went back to reading her tablet. Strange, Harper thought. Most passengers in first class savoured every course, as if to prove they belonged. 2 hours later, when Selena rose to head toward the lavatory, Harper's instincts sharpened. She had cleaned that lavatory herself earlier and knew it was in unacceptable condition, but she also knew the opportunity to assert control had arrived. She stepped into Selena's path, holding out a folded tissue. "Not ready," she said crisply. "You'll need to wipe it down first if you want to use it." The words slid off Harper's tongue as if they were routine, though she had never once said them to another passenger in 30 years. She expected irritation, perhaps even a muttered complaint. That was fine. It reminded passengers who was in charge. What she did not expect was the stillness in Selena's response. The woman didn't argue, didn't fumble or raise her voice. She simply looked at Harper, eyes steady, and then at the tissue in Harper's hand. The silence stretched a second too long, unsettling Harper in ways she couldn't name. Around them, a few heads turned. A businessman in row 3 whispered something to his seatmate. The air tightened, the way it always did before a scene unfolded. Harper straightened her posture, doubling down. "I said, wipe it down first. We maintain certain standards in this cabin." That phrase, certain standards, had carried her through countless confrontations. It made her sound authoritative, professional, above personal bias. Yet even as she spoke, Harper caught her junior colleague, Maya Flores, shifting uneasily near the galley. Maya's lips pressed together, eyes flicking between Selena and Harper, as if silently pleading to de-escalate. Harper ignored her. Authority required consistency, and consistency meant not backing down. In Harper's mind, the logic was simple. If passengers looked like they didn't belong, they often didn't. She had seen it before. Counterfeit tickets, fraudulent upgrades, people sneaking into cabins they hadn't paid for. And yes, sometimes they happened to look like Selena Ward, young, casually dressed, traveling alone. Harper insisted to herself that her suspicion was professional, not personal. Still, a flicker of something sharper pulsed beneath that reasoning. She didn't dwell on it. As the minutes stretched, Harper imagined the aftermath. If the woman complied and wiped down the lavatory, Harper's authority would be reaffirmed in front of the whole cabin. If she resisted, Harper could escalate, call security, involve the captain. Either way, Harper would be the figure of order, the enforcer of standards. She had been in similar situations before. Last year, she had confronted a man claiming his seat was upgraded at the gate. He had turned out to be a basketball player, someone Harper had never heard of, and though a few passengers had complained about her tone, management sided with her. They always did. Harper believed they would again. In her mind, she was untouchable. What Harper didn't know What she couldn't have known was that the quiet, modestly dressed woman in 2A was not a fraud, not an interloper, not someone to humiliate into compliance. Selena Ward was someone with more authority over Harper's airline than Harper herself could ever imagine, and before this night ended, Harper's name would no longer stand for order. It would stand for disgrace. The silence between Harper Lang and Selena Ward stretched into something jagged. The hum of the engine seemed louder, the clink of a glass sharper, the shuffle of passengers more deliberate as eyes drifted toward the scene by the first-class lavatory. Selena stood poised, the tissue still extended inches from her face. She neither accepted it nor stepped back. Instead, her voice came steady, even polite. "Are you asking me to clean the restroom before I use it?" Harper's chin tilted higher, sensing the crowd's attention. She had a choice: soften, explain, step away. But 30 years of pride refused the option. She leaned closer, lowering her voice, but amplifying its bite. "I'm telling you, if you want to use it, you'll make sure it's clean. People in this cabin expect higher standards," murmurs rippled. A man in row 3 chuckled under his breath. "She's got a point. Looks like she doesn't belong here anyway." Another passenger hushed him, uncomfortable. Phones appeared tilted just slightly, but unmistakably recording. Selena's gaze swept the cabin briefly, meeting the stairs, acknowledging the lenses, then returning to Harper. "I paid for this seat like everyone else," she said softly. "And I expect the same respect as everyone else." The calmness rattled Harper. She had expected a flustered denial or a guilty retreat, not composure. Something about that composure provoked her more than defiance would have. She stepped forward, invading Selena's space, tissue now almost pressed against her chest. "Respect is earned, not demanded. If you want to be here, act like it. Show me you understand what this cabin represents." Gasps broke out. Someone muttered, "This is going too far." But Harper fed on the attention. Her voice carried now, loud enough for every row to hear. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry you have to witness this. Unfortunately, some passengers try to take advantage of the system. That's why we enforce protocol." Selena's eyes flickered. She felt the weight of every gaze, the sting of Harper's words. Protocol? This wasn't protocol. This was prejudice wrapped in a uniform. But she remained rooted, choosing stillness over reaction. Maya Flores, the junior attendant, edged closer. Her voice was tentative. "Harper, maybe we should—" "Stay out of this, Maya," Harper snapped. The younger woman recoiled, eyes wide, silenced. Selena breathed once, then spoke. "You don't know who I am, and you don't need to. All you need to know is that I am a passenger in this cabin, entitled to dignity." Her words, measured and precise, carried further than Harper's bark. Several passengers nodded subtly. Others shifted uneasily, realizing their phones were capturing more than a simple argument. Harper's pulse quickened. She sensed control slipping, and control slipping meant reputation at risk. She had handled dozens of confrontations, but never with this much attention, never with so many witnesses pressing record. So she escalated. "Security will handle this," Harper declared. She pressed the intercom button near the galley. "Captain, we have a passenger refusing compliance. Please notify ground security upon landing." The cabin stirred with a mixture of alarm and disbelief. A passenger whispered, "Compliance? She just asked to use the restroom." Another added, "This is ridiculous." Selena exhaled slowly, her hand brushing the tissue aside at last. It fluttered to the floor, a tiny symbol of resistance. She turned her back on Harper and addressed the cabin itself. "Is anyone here unclear on what just happened?" A hush fell. The businessman who had chuckled earlier shifted in his seat, cheeks flushing, as he quickly angled his phone screen away. Others glanced at one another, uncertain but increasingly sympathetic to Selena. Harper's jaw tightened. Losing the crowd was more dangerous than losing a single passenger. "Sit down immediately," she ordered, pointing toward Selena's seat like a judge handing down sentence. But Selena didn't move. She stood as if rooted in bedrock, her voice calm but louder now. "You've asked me to clean your restroom to prove I belong in this seat. You've accused me of exploiting the system in front of strangers. And now you've threatened me with security for asking for basic respect. Tell me, what regulation allows you to do any of that? The question hit Harper like turbulence she hadn't braced for. Regulations were her shield, her excuse. Yet she knew deep down, no manual authorized humiliation as policy. Still, she couldn't admit it. Not in front of 32 passengers with cameras. Regulations authorize me to maintain standards and discipline, she insisted. Voice rising, Selena's lips curved into that same faint, knowing smile from earlier. No, regulations authorize you to ensure safety, nothing more. And what you've done here is unsafe, for me and for this entire airline. The words carried a weight Harper couldn't place. They weren't the words of an ordinary passenger. They rang with legal precision, the cadence of someone who had argued in boardrooms and hearings. Passengers shifted. One woman whispered, "She sounds like a lawyer." Another murmured, "Or a regulator." Harper's confidence faltered just slightly. She tried to cover it by calling louder, "Sit down before I have you restrained." Selena's voice cut through hers, calm but unyielding. "No, I will not sit. Not until this cabin understands exactly what has been done here. And not until you understand the cost of what you've just set in motion." For a split second, silence reigned, thick, charged, heavy with the sense that something irreversible had just happened. Harper stared, heart hammering, unable to grasp why this passenger refused to break. The cabin, however, understood. Phones remained lifted. Every word, every gesture, every flash of Harper's disdain was preserved. And in the stillness, many realized they were not just witnessing a petty confrontation. They were witnessing a fault line crack wide open. Selena turned, walked back to her seat, and sat with deliberate calm. She opened her tablet again, but she did not read. She simply waited, knowing the next hours would unravel Harper's world. And as the engines roared onward toward Geneva, the flight itself felt less like a journey across an ocean and more like the first leg of a reckoning that would ground an entire fleet. The cabin had quieted, but the tension lingered like static before a storm. Harper Lang retreated to the galley, her uniform crisp but her composure fraying. She poured water into a glass with hands that trembled faintly, angry at herself for showing weakness. It wasn't supposed to go this way. She was the authority here, not that woman in 2A. Passengers whispered across the aisle. Some replayed videos they had just captured, shaking their heads at Harper's tone. A man muttered, "She handled herself better than the attendant did." A woman replied softly, "I've flown 100 times. Never seen anything like that." Selena Ward sat in her seat with quiet stillness, her tablet open but untouched. Her eyes remained steady, scanning the cabin once, then closing as if to listen inward. To anyone else, she might have looked like a woman simply enduring embarrassment. But inside, Selena's mind worked with practiced precision. This wasn't the first time someone had underestimated her. At 23, fresh out of law school, she had entered a corporate boardroom to argue against one of the largest airlines in the world. They had laughed when she introduced herself. Young, black, female, barely older than the interns who fetched coffee. But when she had cited regulatory statutes clause by clause, dismantling their case until the CEO himself admitted defeat, the laughter stopped. Since then, Selena had learned that underestimation was her sharpest weapon. Let them think you are small. Their shock when you reveal your strength becomes its own advantage. Her phone buzzed against the tray table. She flipped it over to reveal a message from Professor Alan Bishop. "Flight trackers show you're airborne. Safe travels. Everything ready for Geneva?" Selena typed back slowly, choosing each word. "Delayed. Confrontation brewing. Will brief when safe to do so." Bishop's reply was almost immediate. "Do not escalate. Document everything. Remember, timing is power." Selena's lips curved. He knew her too well. Across the aisle, Maya Flores stole glances at Selena, guilt tugging at her features. The junior attendant had never liked Harper's methods, but speaking against her senior in front of passengers felt like career suicide. Still, what she had witnessed gnawed at her. She mouthed quietly, almost inaudibly, "I'm sorry." Selena met her gaze and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Forgiveness, not blame. That nod steadied Maya's heart more than words could. In the galley, Harper tapped furiously at the interphone, summoning Captain Edward Walker. The veteran pilot's voice crackled back, calm and clipped. "What's the problem, Harper?" "We've got a non-compliant passenger in first class." Refused instruction disrupted the cabin. There was a pause. Walker knew Harper's tone. She had cried wolf before. Non-compliance in what sense? "She refused to follow hygiene protocol before using the lavatory," Harper replied, lowering her voice to hide the absurdity. The silence on the line stretched. Finally, Walker sighed. "Harper, let's not escalate a restroom dispute. Keep it professional. We'll sort it on the ground if necessary." Harper bristled. Even the captain doubted her now. She hung up sharply, muttering, "You'll see." Meanwhile, Selena opened a secure app on her tablet. Most passengers would not recognize it. A portal accessible only to members of the International Council on Aviation Standards. Her credentials allowed her to file reports directly to the Council's oversight servers, instantly time-stamped and authenticated. Her fingers hovered, but she didn't file yet. Timing was everything. Instead, she drafted notes, recording details while they were fresh. Harper's exact words, the tissue shoved at her. The phrase, "standards of this cabin." She noted the presence of recording passengers. Maya's discomfort, Harper's call to the captain. She wrote like a lawyer building a case, because that's exactly what she was doing. She paused only when Officer Daniel Okoro appeared at the edge of the cabin. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the calm professionalism of airport security, he spoke quietly to Harper in the galley. Passengers craned their necks, curiosity rising. "Passenger in 2A, Harper said sharply. "She's refusing compliance. I want her flagged when we land." Okoro glanced toward Selena. His eyes narrowed, not in suspicion but in assessment. He saw a woman sitting calmly, tablet open, hands steady. No sign of disorderly conduct. He returned his gaze to Harper. "Flagging a passenger requires grounds. What exactly did she refuse?" "She wouldn't clean the lavatory before using it," Harper hissed, as though saying it louder would make it sound reasonable. Okoro blinked once, then straightened. "That's not non-compliance. That's not even protocol." Harper's cheeks flushed crimson. "I have authority to maintain standards, and I have authority to enforce actual regulations," Okoro cut in smoothly. His voice carried the weight of a man who had dealt with far greater threats than a restroom dispute. "Unless she poses a safety risk, she's done nothing wrong." Passengers nearby overheard, their whispers rising again. Harper felt the sting of losing ground. Her authority, once unshakable, was cracking in real time. Selena watched, silent, her expression unreadable. She didn't need to intervene, not yet. Harper was dismantling herself piece by piece. But Selena wasn't only thinking of herself. She thought of the countless complaints she had read over the years, buried in corporate systems. Passengers humiliated for their accents, their clothes, their color. Flight attendants shielded by discretion that became a mask for bias. Harper was one of many. And tonight, Selena realized, she had been handed the chance to turn one ugly moment into something far larger. Her phone buzzed again. Another message, this time not from Bishop, but from an encrypted council line. Monitoring situation. Videos surfacing online. Confirm if escalation required. Selena looked around. Several passengers were indeed uploading already, their screens glowing with progress bars. The story was no longer confined to this cabin. It was airborne in more ways than one. She typed back one word, "Wait." Then she closed the tablet, folded her hands, and leaned back in her seat. The calmness wasn't performance, it was strategy. She knew Harper would return, desperate to reclaim control. She knew the cabin would keep watching. And she knew that when she finally chose to speak, every witness would remember her words. Hidden strength was not about shouting louder. It was about knowing when to let silence speak, when to let arrogance collapse under its own weight. Selena Ward was waiting, and timing was almost ripe. Harper Lang returned to the first-class cabin like a general marching back onto a battlefield. Her jaw was tight, her heels striking the carpet with clipped finality. She had spent the last half-hour in the galley, fuming at Captain Walker's lack of support and Officer Okoro's quiet dismissal. Both men had undermined her authority, and worse, passengers had witnessed it. This could not stand. She scanned the rows until her eyes found Selena Ward, still seated calmly in 2A. That serenity infuriated her. Most passengers, when challenged, showed cracks, nervous glances, shaky hands, hurried explanations. But Selena radiated an unnerving steadiness, as though the confrontation hadn't happened at all. Harper stepped closer, voice rising. "Ms. Ward, I need to see your boarding pass again. And your ID now." Gasps fluttered through the cabin. Passengers glanced at one another. Wasn't this settled already? Phones lifted higher, their small red lights blinking. Selena closed her tablet deliberately, placed it on her lap, and met Harper's eyes. "You've already seen my boarding pass. It was valid then. It's valid now. I have authority to re-verify if I suspect fraud," Harper pressed. "Suspect fraud," Selena repeated, her tone sharp enough to slice the air. "On what grounds?" Harper faltered, just slightly. "You don't match the profile of this cabin." The phrase landed with a thud. Several passengers muttered disapprovingly. Maya Flores winced visibly. Selena's lips curved into that faint, cutting smile. "Profile of this cabin," she echoed. "Would you care to define that for everyone listening? Or shall I?" Her voice carried like a gavel. The cabin hushed. Phones captured every syllable. Harper's throat tightened. She hadn't meant to say it so plainly. But pride refused to let her retreat. First-class passengers maintain certain appearances, certain standards, clothing standards. Selena interrupted smoothly. "Skin color standards? Or is there a manual I haven't read that outlines which passengers are entitled to basic respect?" The words cracked like thunder. Gasps erupted. Someone whispered, "She's finished." Harper's face flushed scarlet. She turned, appealing to Officer Okoro. "You heard her. She's being combative, disruptive." Okoro crossed his arms. "What I heard was a passenger asking you to justify your words, which you can't." His voice was calm, but its firmness made the divide clear. Selena rose to her feet at last. Not hurriedly, not angrily, but with deliberate grace. She held her phone in one hand, her tablet in the other. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted from patient to powerful, carrying the cadence of someone used to commanding rooms far larger than this cabin. "My name is Selena Ward. I am a senior attorney with the International Council on Aviation Standards. I write the regulations you claim to enforce." The words detonated in the air. Passengers gasped audibly. Even Harper staggered back half a step, blinking as if struck. Selena continued, her voice steady, undeniable. "You demanded that I clean a lavatory to prove I belonged here. You accused me of fraud in front of witnesses. You attempted to misuse security to intimidate me. All of this is recorded. By passengers, by the Council's monitoring systems, and by me." She held up her tablet, screen glowing with the draft report she had been building. The seal of the International Council shimmered unmistakably in the corner. Harper's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Words deserted her. Selena turned to the cabin, sweeping her gaze across the passengers. "You are all witnesses. What happened here tonight is not just about one woman being insulted. It is about systemic abuse of authority that puts every passenger at risk. And as of this moment, I am formally initiating an investigation into NorthStar Airlines training and compliance procedures." The declaration was more than words. It was power, exercised in real time. Maya covered her mouth, eyes wide with awe. Passengers leaned forward, whispering urgently. A man near the back muttered, "She can actually do that." Another answered, "If she's who she says she is." "Absolutely," Harper tried to recover. "This is absurd. You can't." But before she could finish, Selena raised her phone and pressed a single button. A soft chime echoed as her report uploaded, transmitted via satellite to council servers across 3 continents. She turned the screen toward Harper, showing the confirmation. "Report filed. Case number 117432 Gen." "It's done," Selena said simply. "Your behavior has just triggered an immediate compliance audit of this airline." The weight of those words settled like an anchor. Passengers erupted. some cheering softly, others muttering disbelief. Officer Okoro's brows lifted. He had suspected she was someone important, but not this. Selena sat back down, her movements calm, composed. She placed her tablet on the tray, folded her hands, and added quietly, almost as an afterthought, "And until this investigation is complete, I have authority to suspend any aircraft operated under NorthStar's license." The cabin fell into stunned silence. Ground an airline's fleet? Who even had that power? Selena Ward did, and Harper Lang, once the unshakable authority of the cabin, now stood frozen, a woman realizing too late that she had picked the worst possible passenger to humiliate. The revelation hung in the cabin like smoke after an explosion. Passengers shifted, whispering, their phones held higher now, ensuring no second of the drama escaped documentation. Even those who had tried to pretend indifference earlier leaned into the spectacle, wide-eyed at the shift of power. Harper Lang's authority, once unquestioned in these rows, cracked like glass underfoot. She opened her mouth, but the words came out jagged. You can't just suspend an airline mid-flight. That's impossible." Selena Ward didn't look at her. She directed her words to Officer Okoro instead. "Please note the time, 22:17 GMT. My official report has been filed. Effective immediately, NorthStar Airlines is under provisional compliance suspension. Pending investigation." Okoro, accustomed to enforcing regulations but rarely witnessing their birth in real time, nodded slowly. He recognized the tone, the procedural weight. "Understood, ma'am." Passengers gasped at the formality of his reply. Harper's face drained of color. "You're siding with her?" she demanded. "I'm following the law," Okoro answered flatly, "which she clearly knows better than any of us here." Selena finally turned her eyes on Harper, calm as ever. "I warned you. Dignity is not optional. Tonight you chose to gamble your authority against mine. You've lost." Harper bristled, clinging to the shreds of her pride. "I've given 30 years to this airline. 30 years. I've protected it from frauds, from liars, from people who try to cheat their way into cabins they didn't pay for." Her voice cracked, loud enough for the entire cabin. "And now one woman with a title thinks she can erase all of that?" Selena's reply came sharp but even. "Your years of service don't excuse discrimination. They don't justify humiliation. 30 years of unchecked behavior is not loyalty, it's negligence." The passengers erupted again, some clapping, others murmuring agreement. A man who had chuckled earlier at Harper's standards comment now shifted uncomfortably, sliding his phone under his jacket as though ashamed of his earlier support. In the galley, Maya Flores whispered urgently, "Harper, stop, please. You're only making it worse." But Harper was drowning in her own defiance. She stepped forward, finger pointed at Selena like a weapon. "You think one report will scare this airline? Corporate will crush it before anyone reads it." Selena raised her phone again, tapping the screen. A new chime sounded. "Not one report, 42 copies. Distributed to international regulators across North America, Europe, and Asia. By the time we land, 3 governments will have received notice. This is bigger than corporate." The cabin was dead silent now, the gravity sinking in. Passengers understood they weren't just witnesses to an argument. They were part of an international scandal unfolding in real time. Captain Edward Walker's voice crackled suddenly over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. Please remain seated. We are experiencing an internal matter that will not affect your safety. However, I've been informed that a regulatory intervention has been triggered. Our flight will proceed to Geneva as planned, but further instructions are pending." "Thank you for your cooperation," gasps followed. The captain had just confirmed Selena's claim. Harper's knees nearly buckled. Selena stood, this time addressing the cabin openly. Her voice carried like a judge delivering a verdict. "Each of you has witnessed what happened here. Each of you has recorded evidence. When this investigation proceeds, your testimony will matter. This isn't just about me. It's about ensuring no passenger is ever treated this way again." One by one, passengers nodded. A woman raised her phone. "I'll testify," another added. "We all saw it." "We'll stand with you," Harper's world shrank with every word, every nod. She turned desperately to Maya. Tell them I was following procedure." Maya's eyes glistened with tears she had held back all evening. "There was no procedure, Harper. You humiliated her because you could, and now it's over." Harper staggered back, as though the betrayal had struck her physically. Officer Okoro stepped forward. "Ms. Lang, I advise you to remain in the galley for the rest of this flight. Upon landing, corporate security and federal investigators will meet us. For now, your authority is revoked." The word revoked landed like a final blow. Harper's lips trembled. You can't take that from me," Selena answered instead. "I didn't take it. You gave it away." With that, Harper sank into the nearest jump seat, her once straight posture collapsing into a slump. She stared at her hands, unable to comprehend the speed of her downfall. Selena sat again, her expression calm, almost solemn. Power wasn't about destroying someone, she reminded herself. It was about forcing institutions to confront their flaws. Tonight wasn't Harper's alone. Tonight was about every unchecked humiliation allowed to fester in silence. Her phone buzzed again, a message from Charlotte Green, president of NorthStar Airlines herself. "Selena, we've received your report. Full cooperation promised. Crisis team en route to Geneva. Please prepare to meet immediately upon landing." Selena's lips pressed into a thin line. The storm had already reached the top. Passengers began murmuring again, but this time not in tension. They leaned toward one another, voices hushed with awe. "She grounded an airline," someone whispered. She actually grounded it. The cabin lights dimmed, signaling quiet hours, but no one felt calm enough to rest. They had witnessed the collapse of authority, the spark of reform, and the rise of a woman they had underestimated. Selena reclined slightly, closing her eyes at last. The fight wasn't finished. Geneva would bring hearings, interviews, reforms. But the tide had turned. Harper Lang had thought she could enforce her will with humiliation. Instead, she had handed the world to the one woman most capable of changing it. And somewhere above the Atlantic, as Flight 782 cut through the night sky, the weight of an entire airline hung in the balance, suspended, waiting for judgment. By the time NorthStar Flight 782 descended into Geneva's crisp dawn, the scandal had already ignited across continents. Clips uploaded mid-air spread like wildfire, a senior flight attendant forcing a black woman to clean a lavatory, only for that ordinary passenger to reveal herself as a global regulator. Headlines bloomed in multiple languages, some sympathetic, others sensational. Passenger exposes airline discrimination in first class. Council lawyer grounds, NorthStar fleet mid-flight. Authority versus prejudice, who controls the cabin? Selena Ward deplaned with the same quiet composure she had shown during the confrontation, though a wall of flashing cameras met her at the arrival gate. She kept her head high, flanked by Officer Okoro and two Swiss officials already briefed on the incident. Behind her, Harper Lang was escorted separately, face hidden, uniform disheveled, a figure crumbling under the weight of her downfall. The world didn't pause. Within hours, NorthStar Airlines' stock price dropped 7%. Analysts predicted steeper losses as regulators confirmed the fleet-wide suspension. Dozens of flights sat idle on tarmacs across Europe and North America, their crews restless, their passengers furious. But the anger wasn't at Selena. It was at the company that had allowed prejudice to fester until it exploded mid-air. In Geneva, Charlotte Green, president of NorthStar, met Selena in a conference room draped with emergency briefing screens. The airline's crisis team looked ashen, clutching printouts of social media feeds filled with hashtags. "Joe Flyfair," "Grounded by Bias," "Selena Ward." "Selena," Charlotte began, her voice strained, "you've put us in an impossible position." "No," Selena corrected calmly, sliding into a chair. "Harper Lang did. And the years of management looking the other way did. I simply ensured the world saw it clearly." The bluntness silenced the room. Professor Alan Bishop joined via video link from New York, his familiar voice carrying authority. "This case isn't just about one airline. It's about an industry problem. NorthStar isn't the first carrier to have these issues, but you're the first to be caught this publicly, this undeniably. Charlotte pinched her temple. What happens next? Selena leaned forward, her voice cool but resolute. Immediate compliance review. Suspension until systemic reforms are not only proposed, but implemented. Independent oversight of crew training. Zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory practices, with real enforcement, not paperwork. And compensation for every passenger who witnessed this incident. The executive shifted uncomfortably, calculating costs. But Charlotte, seasoned enough to recognize a storm she couldn't outfly, nodded. Done. Whatever it takes. Meanwhile, outside the boardroom, passengers from Flight 782 gave interviews to media crews. David Kim, the entrepreneur who had filmed much of the confrontation, played back clips for reporters. His video captured Harper's words, "You don't match the profile of this cabin," alongside Selena's calm rebuttals. The footage spread across news cycles, dissected by commentators as an emblem of bias laid bare. Civil rights organizations seized the moment. Statements poured in from advocacy groups, demanding stronger protections for passengers against discrimination in all forms of transport. Politicians weighed in, some praising Selena's courage, others criticizing regulators for acting too aggressively against a major airline. But the public was firmly on Selena's side. Ordinary travelers saw themselves in her, people too often dismissed by gatekeepers of privilege, people who wanted dignity as much as legroom. For Harper Lang, the consequences came swiftly. By midday, NorthStar issued a statement. Effective immediately, Harper Lang's employment is terminated. NorthStar Airlines will cooperate fully with federal and international authorities in ongoing investigations. The language was cold, transactional, stripping 30 years of service down to a single sentence. Yet Harper's downfall was not the end. It was the catalyst. Within a week, regulators across Europe convened emergency sessions. The European Aviation Authority announced new oversight committees specifically tasked with monitoring discrimination in air travel. The U.S. Federal Aviation Administration, pressured by mounting public outcry, declared it would reopen past complaints previously dismissed as unsubstantiated. Industry analysts called it the Ward effect. Airlines scrambled defensively. Delta, Lufthansa, Emirates, carriers that once saw themselves as untouchable, rushed to release public commitments to bias training, anonymous reporting systems, and independent passenger advocacy boards. What began with one confrontation in the aisle of a Boeing 787 now rippled across the skies, rewriting policies faster than lobbyists could contain them. Selena, however, refused to bask in the spectacle. When a journalist asked her outside the Geneva conference hall if she felt proud of grounding an entire airline, she shook her head. Pride isn't the point. Accountability is. This isn't about destroying a company. It's about forcing it to live by the values it claims. Her words, clipped and measured, were replayed as often as the video of Harper shoving the tissue into her hands. Inside the conference hall, she presented her original report on aviation safety, weaving the incident seamlessly into her broader argument. Safety wasn't just mechanical, it was cultural. A plane could have the strongest engines in the world, but if bias corrupted the people enforcing its rules, passengers were still unsafe. Her speech ended with a single line that would be quoted in newspapers for weeks. Discrimination is turbulence. It destabilizes trust, disrupts safety, and if unchecked, it will bring any system down. The hall erupted in applause. Meanwhile, Harper's world collapsed further. Former colleagues distanced themselves. Neighbors avoided eye contact. Family calls ended in tense silence. For decades, she had believed her authority was untouchable. Now she was a symbol of its abuse. But while Harper's downfall dominated gossip, Selena's vision drove reform. Airlines began hiring consultants not only in customer service, but in cultural competence. Training modules shifted from memorizing procedures to recognizing dignity. Passenger advocacy groups gained traction, suddenly empowered by an example too visible to ignore, and across social media, ordinary travelers began sharing their own stories, times when they had been dismissed, profiled, humiliated. Selena read many of them late at night in her Geneva hotel room, her chest heavy. The problem was bigger than she alone could solve. But change, she knew, began somewhere. Tonight it had begun in seat 2A. The Geneva conference ended, but the story refused to fade. Days turned into weeks, and still Selena Ward's name filled headlines. To some, she was a hero who had exposed the rot within a trusted industry. To others, she was a disruptor, a woman who dared to ground an entire airline with a single report. Selena, though, avoided the noise. Her days were consumed with hearings, compliance reviews, and late-night strategy sessions with Professor Alan Bishop. Yet in the quiet of her hotel room overlooking Lake Geneva, she allowed herself moments of reflection. She thought about her father, who had once been denied boarding on a domestic flight decades earlier because his seat had been accidentally double-booked. He had walked away humiliated, carrying his dignity silently because he feared making trouble. Selena carried that memory everywhere. The reason she fought, the reason she refused silence when others tried to force it on her. But this time was different. This time the world had not looked away. Cameras had caught everything, witnesses had spoken, and justice had begun to take shape in real time. Still, Selena knew the fight wasn't over. Structural change was never immediate. For every reform NorthStar promised, dozens of other airlines scrambled to protect their image without changing their culture. Her work was only beginning. Across town, Harper Lang sat in a rented flat, blinds drawn. The uniform she once wore with pride hung limp in the corner, a relic of authority now stripped away. For the first few days after the incident, she had seethed with anger. She told herself she was the victim, that Selena had staged everything to humiliate her, that passengers had betrayed her, but anger could not hold forever. As the news cycled endlessly, Harper finally forced herself to watch the videos. She had resisted at first, afraid to see herself through others' eyes. But curiosity won, and late one night she pressed play. There she was, standing over Selena, tissue extended like a command, words sharp, voice dripping with disdain. The clip replayed, "You don't match the profile of this cabin," until Harper flinched at the sound of her own voice. She had said it. She couldn't deny it, and for the first time, she saw what the world saw. Not a loyal veteran protecting standards, but a woman weaponizing authority against someone who had done nothing wrong. Tears came unbidden. 30 years of service, undone in 3 minutes of arrogance. Her phone buzzed occasionally, former colleagues sending cautious texts. Some expressed sympathy, others distance. Most simply stayed silent. She had become a pariah in the only industry she had ever known. Harper thought of Maya Flores, the young attendant she had snapped at. She had spent years telling herself she was mentoring juniors, teaching them discipline. But had she only taught them fear? Harper replayed Maya's small, broken voice. "There was no procedure, Harper. You humiliated her because you could." The truth stung more than any punishment. Meanwhile, Selena's days blurred into long hours at the International Council. Yet even in the chaos, she sought balance. She met with Maya privately, away from the cameras. The younger woman sat nervously at a cafe table, expecting scolding. Instead, Selena smiled gently. "You spoke the truth when it mattered most," she said. That took courage. Maya's eyes watered. "I didn't stop her. I should have said more." "You said enough," Selena replied. "Sometimes silence is survival, but you won't stay silent forever." Those words planted a seed Maya hadn't known she needed. Back at her flat, Harper finally reached for pen and paper. She hadn't written a letter in years, but the words came haltingly. "To Ms. Ward, I can't undo what I did. I can't erase the humiliation I caused you. But I want you to know that I see it now. I see the cruelty in my words, the emptiness in the authority I clung to. For 30 years I believed I was protecting standards. In truth, I was protecting my pride. I don't ask for forgiveness. I ask only that you know I regret what I said and what I became." She folded the letter, but did not send it. Not yet, maybe never. But writing it loosened something in her chest, something she had carried for years. Selena never saw that letter, but she sensed Harper's unraveling through news reports. Some journalists chased Harper down for comments, but she declined every interview. Perhaps silence was her punishment. Perhaps it was her first step toward accountability. For Selena, the reflection was different. She stood one evening on the balcony of her hotel, watching the lights dance across Lake Geneva. She thought of the power she wielded, the authority to ground fleets, to demand reforms. Power was a double-edged blade. It could defend, but it could also destroy. She whispered softly into the night, as if to her father's memory, "I'll use it carefully. I promise." The next morning she returned to the council chambers, her mind sharpened again for the battles ahead. Harper's downfall was not the end. It was only the beginning of a movement she intended to see through, no matter how long it took. And somewhere in her flat, Harper Lang stared at the uniform she would never wear again, grappling with a question she had avoided her entire life. Who was she without the power of that uniform? The answers would come slowly, painfully. For both women, the confrontation on Flight 782 was not just an ending. It was a mirror, one showing them who they had been and who they still might become. Months passed, but the echo of Flight 782 still reverberated across the aviation world. What had begun as a single confrontation in a first-class cabin had grown into a global reckoning. NorthStar Airlines remained under provisional suspension for nearly a year. The grounding cost billions in revenue, forced the resignation of several top executives, and reshaped its leadership board entirely. When the fleet finally returned to the skies, it did so under new regulations written directly by Selena Ward and her colleagues at the International Council on Aviation Standards. Flight attendant training underwent a transformation. The old modules, once focused almost exclusively on technical procedures and customer compliance, now included cultural competence, dignity assurance, and anti-bias education. Every new recruit was required to pass not only safety drills, but also ethical evaluations. The phrase passenger profile was stripped from internal manuals altogether. Passengers noticed the difference. In surveys conducted a year after the scandal, NorthStar ranked higher in trust and transparency than it ever had before. Ironically, what Harper Lang had believed would destroy the airline instead forced it into becoming a model for reform. But the story's legacy didn't stop at one carrier. Other airlines, pressured by public expectation and regulatory oversight, adopted similar reforms. Delta launched its Every Passenger Matters initiative. Emirates introduced cultural equity training for its global staff. Lufthansa partnered with civil rights organizations to audit bias complaints. Industry leaders called it a paradigm shift. Travelers called it justice, and yet for Selena Ward, the work never felt finished. Sitting in her Geneva office, stacks of case files surrounding her, she sometimes thought back to that tissue Harper had shoved at her, flimsy and dismissive. It symbolized every moment people had been told to clean up after injustices they hadn't caused. She had refused it then. She refused it still. Her colleagues often urged her to take pride in her role as the catalyst for change. Professor Alan Bishop once told her during a late-night call, "You turned humiliation into reform." That's more than most people accomplish in a lifetime. But Selena's reply remained the same. It's not about pride. It's about ensuring it doesn't happen again. Across the city, Harper Lang lived in obscurity. She never returned to aviation. Occasionally, tabloids published grainy photos of her walking to markets, shoulders hunched, face hidden. She declined every interview, every opportunity to defend or explain herself. Some saw her silence as cowardice. Others saw it as contrition. Privately, Harper wrestled with who she was without the uniform. She volunteered occasionally at a local shelter, stocking shelves quietly, unnoticed. She never introduced herself as flight attendant anymore. She didn't introduce herself at all. In the stillness of her nights, she often replayed the cabin scene in her mind. She would hear her own voice saying, "You don't match the profile of this cabin." and wince. She sometimes imagined standing up in front of young attendants and warning them, "Don't be who I was. Authority without respect is cruelty." Perhaps one day she would speak those words aloud. For now, she kept them inside. For Maya Flores, life had taken a different turn. She stayed with NorthStar through the suspension, retraining under the new system. She flourished in the new culture, free from the shadow of Harper's intimidation. A year later, she earned promotion to lead attendant. When she boarded her first flight, wearing the new rank insignia, she whispered to herself, "This is for Selena." Passengers noticed her warmth, her fairness, her respect. And in every smile she gave, she carried the lesson she had learned that night in Seat 2A. Silence can protect you, but truth can set you free. Selena, meanwhile, became a symbol far larger than herself. At conferences, young lawyers approached her with admiration. Travelers sent letters describing their own stories of humiliation, thanking her for giving voice to their pain. Civil rights groups invited her to speak. Universities asked her to lecture. And even airline executives, once defensive, now sought her counsel. One evening, during a televised interview, the host asked her, "What do you hope history remembers about Flight 782? Selena paused, her gaze steady on the camera. "I hope it remembers that dignity is not optional." That one voice, calm but firm, can shift entire systems. And that true authority is not measured in uniforms or titles, but in how we treat one another. The words rippled across screens, replayed on social media, quoted in articles. For many, it became the defining lesson of the saga, and so the legacy of Flight 782 lived on. Not in the scandal, not in the humiliation, but in the transformation it sparked. A fleet had been grounded, yes, but in grounding, it had risen again, stronger, fairer, more just. On her balcony overlooking Lake Geneva, Selena sometimes watched planes soar overhead, silver wings catching the sun. She would think of her father, of the passengers who had stood with her, of Maya's quiet nod of courage. She would think of Harper, too, a reminder of how easily authority could be corrupted. Then she would whisper softly, a promise carried on the wind, "Never again." Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.